Build Your Business listeners. This is Matt Reynolds, your host for the podcast, and you are listening to what we are calling the legacy episodes. And really, these are the pre-episodes that really led to this podcast, the Build Your Business podcast. This is really my life's work and my brother's life's work in building your business. And so they were originally published in the Barbell Logic podcast as part of the Principles or Coaching Success series, but really touch on similar topics to the Build Your Business podcast: how to improve your productivity, how to set and accomplish your goals, deprioritize urgent tasks, to focus on what is most important to you, and most importantly, to become a better person and leader and business owner overall. I'm proud to bring you these podcasts. Again, many years of life's work, several years of podcasts, and several decades of business ownership. Hope you enjoy them and learn from them. You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. This is a principles episode. This one's going to be a short one. This is actually me all by myself for your Sunday morning. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about values and taking stock of those values, those things that are really important in your life. This week has been an interesting week. And we've had an incredible week in the business, some kind of just big things that have happened. And I am overwhelmed with, I'm so grateful at what I get to do every day and the company I get to run and the people I get to work with. And while that was going on this week and lots of work with the business, I was planning a raised bed garden. I've had gardens before. I've had container gardens and normal gardens. I've never done a raised bed garden. And here in this time of quarantine and COVID and we can't leave, we just felt like it was a great thing to do. And so we just made it a family project, and we made some raised beds. And our good friend Jordan Gross, who's a client of ours and a buddy of mine, suggested that we do that. And he runs a great farm, and so we put that together, and it's just been a blast to be able to do that as a family. And it got me thinking about, again, those very specific things that bring me value. And so I want to put out a challenge this week, and even today, because a lot of times Sundays are, even in the midst of COVID, where almost every day is the same, there's something about Sunday that seems a little more relaxed than all the other days. And I would just challenge you to really take stock in the things, like the specific things that bring you value and the things that rob you of value. And so if you go all the way back to episodes, I think 94 and 95, those first 100 episodes, we're way past 300 now. I think I talk about the things that bring me value and rob me of value in episode 94. It's a pretty short episode. I think it's about 30 minutes. And then Scott does the same thing in 95. And we'll talk some to Chris, to my brother as well, here in the next few weeks about the things that bring him value, although you're probably starting to see those things in these principles episodes. And so as I would challenge you to literally sit down and take a piece of paper or a 5x7 note card and write the things that you do on a daily or weekly basis, or maybe not that often, but wish you did, that really bring value to your life. And when I say value, I'm not talking about finances, although that could be part of it. I'm talking about joy. I'm talking about things that last, things that, I've talked about before, that happiness is often fleeting. What are the things that last longer than a day, longer than a week? You get a new iPhone, you get a new car, you get a new gadget. It makes you happy and it sort of satisfies, gives you that dopamine rush and gives you that instant gratification, but it doesn't last. So I would never say like a new phone brings me value or a new car brings me value. There are very few actual materialistic things that do bring me value, but there are things that I do on a daily basis that do. And one of those things, actually, for me, I don't know that I've ever even talked about it, but I would think that Scott would concur. One of the things that brings me value is actually manual labor. I like it. I hated it when I was a kid. And my brother joked about this a few weeks ago, that anytime there were family chores to be done or groceries to be unloaded, I would sort of skirt that issue. And my 15-year-old daughter seems to do that today, and so the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. And And as I have gotten older and hopefully more mature, I have noticed that while I spend an inordinate amount of time running a business where there is really, the work is never done, there is something incredibly satisfying about doing a manual labor job, like planting a garden, like building a raised bed, like landscaping in your yard, like we laid seed, grass seed for the spring in some bare spots. And you can go back and look at that thing when you're done and say, like, I did something, and I can see the fruits of my labor. And that's a little harder in a job when you're running a large tech company, or even when I was a teacher, it was hard. Just the end was sort of the end of the semester, and you didn't really know the impact you had on your student's life till maybe ever, or maybe years down the road when they reach back out to you. And so I would challenge you to sit down and actually lay down those, or write out those things that you do on a daily basis that brings you value. What I've noticed about those things for me is that they would almost always be considered amoral. They're not necessarily really, really good things or really, really bad things. So there are things like, I love giving back. I love being able to quote unquote bless people financially or with other ways to be able to give my time or work or like that. That makes me feel great. But that's most people would say that's a moral thing to do. And so I'm really talking about things like, we had a great discussion tonight walking through sort of American history in 15 major points with my kiddos. And it was like an overview of America. We just had this great, somehow we got on this conversation. I don't even know how we did it, about like, what are the big things that have happened to the United States? And we laid out kind of 15 major things. And it was a blast, and it brought us value. And I think my kids will remember it for years to come. And so things like that bring me value. Things like having a good meal, like cooking with my wife. We'll play music that we love. Maybe it's classical music. Maybe it's like really chill bluegrass type music, or whatever the mood is, and that brings me value. Like is cooking food moral or immoral? No, it's amoral. Like it doesn't really have morality. It's not good or bad. It just is a thing that brings me joy, and I love it. And so certainly quality time with my wife, quality time with my kids. What does that look like? Like great talks with my kids. I love it. Being in my library upstairs, and one of my kiddos is in there, and we're just having a conversation about life. And sometimes, my kids ask me questions about things that I would never have asked my parents because it just felt unsafe to do that. And so those things really bring me value. Certainly reading brings me tremendous value. And there's lots of places there in reading, even itself, the way I've divided that up. Like there are things that I read, like there are theology books that just, or even parts of scripture, of the Bible, that just wreck me. When I read Romans 8, or when I read Psalms or Proverbs, it just wrecks me. And there are times when I have books that I go back to. There's a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I've talked about that before. And it is reminiscent about just the hard things that happen in business. 2019 was the toughest year of my life. And 2020 thus far has been the best year of my life. And there's probably more news to come there as we move along. And so it's I'm thankful. I'm grateful. Honestly, a part of me feels a little bit guilty. I know much of the world is suffering, and we are not. And we're not just talking about finances or how good business is. It's good to own an online business right now, for sure. But again, it comes down to the gratitude of the people that I work with, the people I'm getting the opportunity to bring on to the team, the growth that we're experiencing and the expansion. Again, not from a necessarily monetary standpoint, but the people we're able to reach and the net of influence we're able to have brings me a ton of value. Sitting out under the stars and thinking about how small I am brings me value. I've said this before, not to make this religious in any way, but I grew up in like traditional Baptist churches, and I remember singing like those old hymns, and I hated them when I was a kid. I hated those hymns, and in my older life, I can see the wisdom in the lyrics and the text of those hymns, and so old hymns sung new, especially if they were a hymn that I get reminded that I chastised when I was 16 or 17 years old and made fun of it because it was old. and I go back and listen to the words, and there's such depth compared to the things that are often sung today in modern evangelical worship services. And so it's incredibly valuable to me. So those things are great. And I've talked about like a great glass of whiskey or a great cup of coffee in the morning, and the way I make the coffee, and the process of grinding the beans and doing the pour over, and that brings me value. And again, there's nothing moral about those things, but to be able to sit down and actually identify that. And so I did this one day. I actually sat down, and I've done it several times. I've sat down and I've laid out these things these are the things that bring me value that I need to do more of. Training. Like, I love to train. I'm one of those guys that really enjoys training. It makes me feel better. It's not medicine. It's not a spoonful of medicine for me. I enjoy the process of training and of getting better. I love the way it makes me feel. I love the way it makes me feel afterwards. I love it. And so it brings me a tremendous amount of value as well. I talked about reading theology books, certainly reading good business books, reading business books from people who are so wise, like so much wiser than I am. I love, and then reading great fiction books at this point, like reading something like Lonesome Dove, one of the greatest fiction books I've ever read. And Brett McKay told me I had to read that book, and it was phenomenal, and it brought me joy. So those things are great. And then on the flip side, I would also encourage you to, on the other side of the sheet, or on the bottom side of the sheet, one of the two, I would lay out the things that you feel like rob you of value, and for me, there are those things like spending too much time watching Netflix or binge watching YouTube, or being on Facebook at all, which I don't use at all anymore, or being on Instagram, which I really don't use either. I mean, very, very rarely rob me of value. Getting caught up in political discussions, especially among the big kind of mainstream media that leans either right or left or whatever, it just causes me stress. And so I'm not really interested in, I want to stay up on the news enough, but I want to get it more from hard data and I'm not interested in people's opinions, and it tends to rob me of value. I can feel my blood pressure go up. So I think that robs me of value. Staying up late robs me of value. Eating too much and feeling bloated and gross robs me of value. Drinking too much obviously robs me of value. And you start getting into some of those things that might actually be immoral, like things like I don't play video games. I make a choice to not watch pornography, and if I have, or if I do, it robs me of value. Like, again, it's not about me being moral or making a moral choice and telling you what to do or not to do. These are things that I've noticed for me rob my life of value. And so spending great time, having great discussions with my wife, it doesn't have to be sexually intimate. It can just be affectionate, like affection with my wife, or just time with my wife where we just talk about things are things that bring me tremendous value. And so whereas staying up too late robs me of value, like we go to bed at the same time. Sleeping in too much, which is very rare for me, and I can't hardly do it even if I wanted to anymore, robs me of value. I don't feel good if I sleep until 8:30 or 9, and it would be impossible if I slept till after that. And so certainly there are things that I've been able to identify, and I've actually written them down. We've got the lists. Some of those are private, but most of them I could talk through. I can identify those things that bring me value or rob me of value. And so I think that you would be surprised if you took, it really only takes about 10 minutes of just nothing going on, no distractions. You could even do a little 25-minute Pomodoro would be more than enough time. And sit silently in a chair with like a notepad or a 5x7 card and just start jotting things down. These are the things that I love and bring me joy. They're good for me. I like them. They make me feel better, and it's not about making me feel better just today. Again, it's not exercise. It's not I'm getting hot and sweaty and I love the way it makes me feel. It's that I love the process of training because of the goal we're working towards. I love the process of running Barbell Logic, the business. I love it. So it's my number one favorite thing to do on earth. I love running this business and working with the people I get to work with. And so lay out those things that you do on a daily basis that bring you value, especially today, in those days where right now you can't, your life is probably more simple because you can't go to work. A lot of you can't go to work, and you can't go to school, and you can't go to the restaurants, and you can't go have the meetings. There's just more time. And so as you sit at home, I've watched people argue about these ideas of some people feel like there's so much more freedom in working from home, and then other people, they're stuck at home with kids that they don't like, and they wish they could go back to work, and they wish the kids could go back to school. Like that's a sad life for me. Like I love being around my family. And that doesn't mean my family's perfect. And doesn't mean that my family doesn't sometimes drive me nuts, or individual members of my family don't drive me nuts. Sometimes they do. But I'm pushing towards investing in those relationships. And as I invest in those relationships and give as much as I can, man, they return threefold, fivefold, tenfold to me. And I get tremendous value out of those relationships, out of those great talks, those great discussions, those family meals, those things are important to me. Again, my list is my list. Your list is yours. But I think it's really important to take stock in, like literally writing down what are those things. And so if you need some ideas to sort of spur that, go back to episodes 94 and 95, listen to Scott and I talk about our own values and the things that bring us value and the things that rob us of value. And I would challenge you to make that list this week. Next week, we'll be back with Chris. We'll talk about through our personality tests, those different things we talked about, the understanding myself, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, some of those others, and see. I would encourage you to do that so you can see sort of how it lays out. And I'm sure you'll be completely different from Chris and I, and Chris and I will be completely different. We'll be on mostly opposite ends of the spectrum. We'll both be industrious, but outside of that, we're going to be all over the place. So thank you so much again for giving us a few minutes of your Sunday morning. I hope you have a blast today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I hope you have a great week with whatever you're doing in work or your family or those things that bring you value. I hope you're able to identify those things, and then also identify the things that rob you of value, and then purge your life as much as you can of the things that rob you of value, and focus on spending more time on those important things that are never urgent. The important things that are never urgent, that bring you value and bring you joy, that last a lifetime, last eternally, last like whatever your belief system is there, that certainly last more than a Wednesday or a Sunday. And so take stock in that. And we will see you tomorrow morning. So thanks for listening.